The German panzer divisions that swept through the Ardennes in May 1940 didn't just defeat the French army. They rewrote the rules of modern warfare and shattered all previous assumptions about defensive strategies. Within a matter of 6 weeks, France had fallen, and the world watched in stunned disbelief as German armored columns rolled past the supposedly impregnable Maginot Line, rendering years of planning almost irrelevant. The speed of the German advance was unprecedented. Towns that had withstood months of siege warfare during the First World War collapsed in mere hours under the combined assault of mechanized infantry, tanks, and Stuka dive bombers. French infantry, trained and equipped in a manner similar to their fathers in 1918, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy whose movements exceeded the capabilities of their communications, supply lines, and command structures. When Panzer IVs and IVs thundered along narrow country roads, accompanied by mechanized infantry and air support, the standard response of scattered retreats or outright surrender became tragically predictable. The psychological shock of seeing massive, coordinated armored columns advance relentlessly caused panic and confusion that often paralyzed defensive units before a single shot was fired. German armor was not necessarily superior in technical specifications. French tanks often had thicker armor and guns of comparable caliber, but the Blitzkrieg doctrine, emphasizing speed, coordination, and surprise, created an aura of invincibility that terrified opposing forces. Infantry soldiers across Europe learned a brutal lesson. When the tracks of German tanks were heard rumbling nearby, running was often the only rational choice. Anti-tank rifles, the primary defensive weapons available to infantry, proved almost useless against even medium-weight German vehicles, leaving ordinary soldiers helpless and demoralized. The British Expeditionary Force experienced this terror firsthand while fighting alongside French units. Their primary infantry anti-tank weapon, the Boy's rifle, weighed a cumbersome 36 pounds and fired a 55mm projectile. In theory, this weapon could penetrate 21mm of armor at a distance of 100 yards, but German Panzer IVs arriving in 1940 carried 30mm of frontal armor, rendering the rifles almost completely ineffective. At Dunkirk, between May 26 and June 4, 1940, the British executed the largest military evacuation in history, rescuing 338,226 soldiers. Yet nearly all their heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, vehicles, and anti-tank guns, was abandoned on the beaches, left behind to rust or be captured. Britain now faced the imminent threat of invasion with virtually nothing capable of stopping a German armored spearhead. The German High Command, emboldened by their success in France, began planning Operation Sea Lion, confident that British infantry would collapse just as French forces had. This confidence was based on reality rather than propaganda. German commanders had observed time and again how infantry units would scatter, surrender, or flee when faced with tanks. Only a few units attempted organized resistance, and they were quickly overwhelmed. German armored divisions seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to appear where the enemy was weakest, exploit gaps in defenses, and sow panic deep behind the front lines. News of these tactics, combined with the psychological terror of rapid mechanized assault, created a sense of inevitability and fear that would haunt European soldiers for years. Civilians, military planners, and frontline soldiers alike faced a terrifying realization. The dominance of tanks had transformed the battlefield, and traditional infantry methods seemed almost obsolete. Newsreels shown in cinemas across Britain reinforced the message. Tanks were now the masters of modern battle, and infantry without effective anti-tank capabilities were virtually powerless. German tactical doctrine deliberately encouraged psychological warfare. Panzer crews were trained to act boldly, to push forward even when tactical caution might suggest otherwise, because aggressive action often caused enemy formations to collapse without direct engagement. Commanders like Heinz Guderian demonstrated that relatively small armored units could paralyze and defeat much larger conventional forces, making the myth of unstoppable armor self-perpetuating. Infantry troops expected to be defeated at the sight of approaching tanks, and their expectations often shaped reality. British military planners, analyzing intelligence reports during the summer of 1940, faced a stark truth. German forces would eventually invade, and the question remained whether British infantry would stand or break like the French. Developing effective anti-tank weapons became an absolute priority, but engineering solutions required time, research, and innovation. German armored divisions, meanwhile, continued to grow stronger, faster, and more experienced, while soldiers returning from Dunkirk brought intelligence describing tanks operating with near impunity, smashing aside defensive positions that should have held. Infantry units were left to confront the terrifying reality of mechanized warfare, where speed, coordination, and psychological dominance were as deadly as firepower. The boy's anti-tank rifle became a symbol of infantry frustration and helplessness. Soldiers nicknamed it the elephant gun, often in bitter irony, as its ferocious recoil frequently broke collarbones, dislocated shoulders, and left operators physically battered after firing a single shot. Its armor-penetrating capabilities were already obsolete by 1940. Using the boy's rifle against an advancing panzer was essentially a ritual of near-suicide, requiring courage beyond measure but offering little chance of success. Britain's heavier 2-pounder towed guns were somewhat effective when properly emplaced, but their limitations were clear. They required transportation, setup, and clear fields of fire. German reconnaissance quickly identified these positions, neutralizing them with artillery fire or bypassing them entirely. Infantry desperately needed a portable, man-carried weapon capable of appearing suddenly, striking the enemy, and disappearing before retaliation. However, physics and engineering presented formidable challenges. Effective armor penetration required either extremely high projectile velocity or massive explosive charges, both of which resulted in weapons far too heavy for infantry to carry. Various experimental solutions, such as sticky bombs, anti-tank grenades, and Molotov cocktails, failed in practical terms. Either they required soldiers to approach enemy tanks within lethal proximity or lacked the power to penetrate modern armored vehicles. The problem demanded innovation that combined portability, lethality, and practicality, a challenge the British military would soon meet through extraordinary ingenuity. By 1941, the War Office outlined ambitious specifications for a new infantry anti-tank weapon. It had to be light enough for 1 or 2 soldiers, capable of penetrating at least 75 mm of armor, effective out to a range of 100 yards, simple to operate, reliable in mud, rain, and cold, and cheap enough to manufacture in Britain's already overburdened industrial base. Multiple design teams explored various approaches. One utilized a spigot mortar principle, allowing a large projectile to be launched over a central rod, creating a high explosive effect without a heavy barrel. Another experimented with shape-charge warheads, exploiting the Monroe effect, discovered decades earlier, which allowed explosive energy to focus into a narrow, superheated jet capable of piercing armor far thicker than conventional explosives of the same weight. By early 1942, these design strands converged on an audacious concept championed by Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker, a spring-propelled, man-portable launcher. The concept sounded almost absurd, using a massive coiled spring to propel a 3-pound shape-charge bomb, but chemical propellants were scarce, manufacturing capabilities were stretched, and a mechanical spring could be produced almost anywhere, stored safely, and handled by ordinary infantry without special precautions. Early testing was punishing. Prototypes occasionally misfired, exploded, or injured operators, yet when a projectile struck armor, the results were revolutionary. Soldiers might finally have a weapon to restore their agency against the once unstoppable panzer. This new weapon would be officially designated the projector, infantry, anti-tank, or PAT, a seemingly ungainly device that would transform infantry tactics and the psychology of armored warfare. The PAT's design was both ingenious and brutal in execution. Weighing 32 pounds unloaded, it resembled a metal tube with a shoulder pad at one end and a trough on top for the bomb. Inside, a massive coiled spring functioned as the propulsion system. Cocking the weapon required the operator to lie on his back, place both feet on the shoulder pad, and pull the lever with full body strength, effectively performing a dangerous mechanical deadlift just to fire a single shot. The shape-charge warhead, the weapon's true innovation, contained a copper cone precisely engineered to collapse into a superheated jet upon detonation, penetrating up to 75 mm of armor regardless of projectile velocity. The firing mechanism relied on the spring to drive a pin into a primer on the bomb's tail, automatically recocking itself if everything went correctly. In practice, misfires were common, and soldiers often had to repeat the grueling cocking process under enemy fire. Veterans described firing the PAT as akin to being kicked by a horse in the shoulder. Despite its challenges, the PAT worked where no other man-portable anti-tank weapon of the time could. It was designed not for elegance but for survival, giving infantry a fighting chance against armored vehicles that had previously inspired panic and rout. Soldiers quickly developed nicknames for it, often less polite than official designations, reflecting the brutal reality of operating such a weapon in combat. The combination of physical exertion, technical complexity, and battlefield application made the PAT a weapon that tested the courage, endurance, and determination of every man who carried it. By early 1943, production of PATs began in earnest. British factories churned out the weapons in thousands, supplying infantry battalions headed for the Mediterranean theatre. Training manuals, thick with warnings, emphasized the weapon's dangers. Never fire from enclosed spaces, always check that bombs were seated properly, and maintain the spring with precise lubrication. Each shape-charge bomb weighed just over 3 pounds, and soldiers could carry only 3 or 4 in addition to the weapon itself. Teams quickly learned the necessity of coordination. One soldier fired the weapon while a second carried extra ammunition, watched for threats, and provided covering fire if enemy infantry approached. The weapon's unique firing and recoil characteristics required adaptation. Soldiers developed techniques for bracing against walls, prone firing, and anticipating mechanical failures. In Sicily, during Operation Husky in July 1943, the PAT demonstrated its potential. Narrow roads, stonewall villages, and terrace hills channeled enemy tanks into predictable routes. In one village near Centuripe, a PAT team positioned in an alleyway disabled a Panzer IV at 40 yards, forcing the crew to abandon the vehicle. The psychological effect was immediate. German commanders realized that British infantry could now actively threaten armored units rather than scatter in terror. The Sicilian campaign offered early proof that the PAT, though physically punishing to operate, fundamentally altered the calculus of armored warfare, empowering infantry to resist tanks in ways previously unimaginable. Following Sicily, the campaign in southern Italy presented even more favorable terrain for PAT operations. Mountainous passes, narrow valleys, and winding roads forced armored vehicles into predictable choke points, ideal for ambushes by hidden infantry teams. At Salerno in September 1943, British forces deployed PAT teams to target German counterattacks relying on tank support. Firing from upper floors, hidden buildings, or rubble, soldiers could strike tanks from angles where armor was thinnest. One corporal managed to disable a Stu G3 assault gun by firing directly onto its engine deck, setting the vehicle ablaze and forcing the crew to flee. The weapon's tactical versatility became evident. It could be used in urban environments, ambush points, and rugged terrain, complementing conventional artillery and machine gun placements. Traditional anti-tank guns had to be positioned carefully, revealing their location once fired, but PAT teams could strike, relocate, and remain concealed. German tank crews, trained to dominate infantry, were now forced to advance cautiously, always considering the possibility of concealed threats. The psychological shift was profound. Infantrymen who had once panicked in the face of armor now held a tool that restored confidence and agency, fundamentally changing their approach to battle and the way units were deployed in coordination with other supporting elements. By late 1943, the PAT had matured into a standard component of British infantry organisation. North African desert campaigns had ended by this point, but lessons learned there influenced the positioning and use of PAT teams in Italy. Infantry anti-tank teams operated in pairs, with one soldier firing and another carrying additional bombs, providing covering fire and target identification. Supply logistics became critical. A PAT bomb weighed over 3 pounds, limiting the number each team could carry, and ammunition resupply required careful planning. The psychological impact on German armoured units grew steadily. Commanders had to adjust tactics, increasing infantry screens around tanks, conducting reconnaissance, and proceeding more cautiously. Blitzkrieg, which relied on speed and shock, lost its effectiveness in terrain that favoured ambush. German tank crews, once confident in their ability to dominate infantry, now approached British units with hesitation and caution. Soldiers armed with PATs exhibited dramatically reduced tendencies to panic. Infantrymen who had previously fled the approach of a tank now analysed terrain, predicted tank movement, and waited for the optimal moment to strike. This shift in behaviour transformed engagements from one-sided routes into tactical confrontations, giving British forces unprecedented control in defensive operations against armoured formations. The true test of the PAT arrived with the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. The bocage terrain, with its dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, and sunken paths, was a perfect proving ground for the weapon. Tanks, including German Panzer IVs, Panthers, and even Tigers, were forced to navigate confined spaces, constantly exposing their flanks. PAT teams exploited this vulnerability with devastating effect. Outside Cannes, during Operation Chanwood and Operation Epsom, British infantry employed PATs in buildings, ditches, and hedgerows to ambush advancing German armour. Success required patience, understanding of tank movement, and nerves of steel. One sergeant in a shell-damaged farmhouse waited until a Panzer IV turned a corner, exposing its side armour at approximately 40 yards, before firing. The first shot penetrated beneath the turret, immobilizing the tank and forcing the crew to evacuate. The second shot targeted the track assembly of a following Panzer IV, effectively neutralizing it. These engagements highlighted how terrain, timing, and tactical knowledge allowed infantry to neutralize even heavily armored vehicles. The PAT was physically punishing and required extraordinary courage, but it transformed infantry into credible threats and disrupted German confidence in armored superiority. The German response to the PAT was swift but fundamentally inadequate. Tank commanders increasingly relied on infantry screens, more thorough reconnaissance, artillery preparation, and smoke cover to protect their vehicles. Yet these measures only slowed their advances rather than eliminating the threat. The pace of Blitzkrieg, previously reliant on speed, concentration of force, and shock, was dramatically reduced when every hedge, building, and rubble pile might conceal a PAT team waiting for the perfect moment to strike. German crews, once confident that infantry could not threaten their armor, now experienced hesitation, stress, and genuine fear with every advance. Engineers were forced to reinforce vehicles, commanders called for more infantry support, and tactics shifted to careful, deliberate movement rather than bold, rapid attacks. This psychological shift was profound. Soldiers armed with PATs no longer viewed themselves as helpless prey. They became active agents capable of neutralizing tanks and shaping the battlefield. British officers noted that infantrymen exhibited patience, tactical thinking, and discipline even under direct tank threat, a remarkable transformation from the routes witnessed in 1940 France. The PAT had reversed the psychological dominance of German armor, forcing crews to reassess threats and slowing the tempo of what had once been a fearsome, unstoppable offensive. Engagements in Normandy and Italy further showcased the PAT's transformative effect on armored warfare. Soldiers armed with PATs learned to prioritize targets, strike vulnerable points such as side or rear armor, and coordinate effectively with other infantry and artillery elements. Each attack required meticulous timing, nerve, and physical endurance. Firing from buildings, ditches, and hedgerows meant exposure to machine guns and artillery, yet soldiers developed innovative techniques, bracing against walls, using prone positions, and working in tandem to maintain a flow of attacks while minimizing risk. Close-range engagements, often between 30 and 50 yards, maximized accuracy and ensured penetration, while terrain features amplified tactical advantages. German tank units, previously accustomed to rolling with minimal concern for infantry, were now forced to proceed cautiously, slow their movements, and increase reliance on reconnaissance and supporting troops. The psychological effect was equally significant. British soldiers no longer panicked in the face of tanks but assessed positions, calculated angles, and waited for the precise moment to strike. The PAT did not guarantee safety or victory, but it fundamentally shifted infantry tactics from reactive retreat to proactive engagement, restoring confidence and agency in the face of previously overwhelming mechanized threats. Documented engagements illustrate the PAT's remarkable impact on the battlefield. At Hill 112, during the late June and early July 1944 battles, British infantry confronted repeated German armored counterattacks. 3 PAT teams, positioned in mutually supporting positions, engaged Panthers advancing across open fields. One Panther was struck directly on its side armor and destroyed, while near misses caused the other 2 to withdraw, hesitant to proceed without infantry support. In the village of Verkage, Sergeant Stan Lockwood used a PAT from a building to halt a Tiger Eye temporarily, proving even the most formidable German tanks were vulnerable to determined infantry. Corporal Edward Chapman, in a destroyed farmhouse near Gravel-Surridon, disabled 2 Panzer IVs by exploiting angles, terrain, and precise timing. These engagements highlighted the combination of courage, tactical skill, and understanding of tank vulnerabilities that PAT operators required. German reports increasingly noted the unpredictable threat posed by concealed infantry. Every building, hedgerow, or piece of debris became a potential death trap. The weapon's psychological influence, forcing tanks to hesitate and commanders to rethink tactics, had arguably more strategic effect than its physical destruction alone. Infantry who once fled now controlled ambushes, dictated engagement terms, and became credible threats in their own right. The influence of the PAT extended far beyond Normandy and Italy, leaving an enduring legacy on infantry anti-tank warfare worldwide. Observing its use, American forces accelerated development of their bazooka, incorporating shape-charge technology, while captured PATs influenced post-war Soviet designs, demonstrating the global significance of portable high-explosive anti-tank weapons. British infantry, humiliated in 1940 by their inability to resist armor, had regained confidence, agency, and tactical flexibility. The weapon remained in service until the early 1950s, gradually replaced by more modern systems like the American bazooka and the British Eniger rifle grenade, yet veterans respected it for its effectiveness despite its cumbersome design and punishing operation. Statistical records are incomplete, but hundreds of tanks were destroyed or disabled, while countless others were diverted, forced to withdraw, or proceed cautiously. The true measure of the PAT's effectiveness lay not in numbers alone but in how it reshaped the battlefield, restored morale, and reversed assumptions about armoured supremacy. Its presence alone forced German commanders to consider the possibility of concealed threats at all times, altering tactics and reducing the confidence that had defined armoured operations for years. The PAT's ingenuity, combined with soldier determination, exemplified wartime adaptation in the face of seemingly insurmountable mechanized advantage. The men who wielded the PAT in combat were ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary feats under extreme stress. Shoulder bruising, back strain, and exposure to fire were daily hazards, yet they held their ground, operating a weapon that demanded both strength and endurance while simultaneously calculating timing, angles, and risk. The PAT gave them the agency to fight back, fundamentally altering their psychology. When German armor appeared, soldiers no longer fled. They analyzed terrain, anticipated routes, and struck with deadly precision. German tank units, once assured of dominance, now faced uncertainty, caution, and fear, especially in confined or urban terrain. While the PAT never gained the elegance or fame of other weapons, it achieved its primary goal, restoring balance between infantry and armoured forces. The psychological effect on both sides, confidence in British soldiers and caution in German crews, was arguably more significant than the number of vehicles destroyed. The weapon symbolized innovation, resilience, and determination, proving that ordinary men with an extraordinary tool could challenge technological supremacy. By instilling courage, tactical initiative, and lethal capability, the PAT transformed infantry from passive targets into active, decisive participants, influencing the outcome of engagements, shaping battlefield psychology, and leaving an enduring mark on the evolution of anti-tank warfare in World War II and beyond.